All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Ginny Adelsheim. We're at her home. It's January 22nd, 2021. Ginny, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
And for the hospitality. First question for you, what got you into wine?
Well, I don't know that I actually ever planned on getting into wine, but it happened. The trajectory was that I was a student at Portland State. I got my degree in sculpture and ceramics with a minor in music, and met Dave there, and he was also a student. And when he got out of the service, we were both in Korea. He got stationed on the DMZ, and I was living in Seoul as an unauthorized dependent for a year and a half. And we came back, and I finished up at Portland State and got my degree. And we were living in a duplex with another couple, and Paul Miller and Rita Larson, who were also artists. Paul was a photographer, and Rita was in textiles. And at that time, Dave was really into building furniture. He was quite a good carpenter and self-taught. And then, of course, I was doing ceramics. And I had been the artist in residence at Contemporary Crafts Gallery, which eventually became Museum of Contemporary Crafts, and then that folded. But, and I had spent a year in this special little studio on Corbett Avenue that was connected to the museum and the gallery. And at the end of that year, this four of us, the couple and Dave and I, decided to move to the country. It was very unstructured idea. We just thought this would really be great if we could move to the country, build our own house, have enough land that we could grow some grapes and make some wine for ourselves, and grow our own food, have chickens and ducks and on and on. And so we did. We found a piece of property. But in the process of looking for that land, we ran into Bill Blosser, Dick Erath, and David and Diana Lett. And totally changed everything, because that was when Dave and Paul realized there were people growing grapes in the Willamette Valley for actual commercial sale. And they were really interested in that. So the property that we bought was purchased with that in mind. And we designed our own house, and we built it with our own hands, but we never got it done because we were always trying to also plant 20 acres of vines and, make some money so we could stay out there. It was really hard, but we managed. Unfortunately, Paul and Rita, it turned out they were not happy. Rita really she was not interested in being in a wine business. She was an artist. And Paul and she split up. And then Dave and I were with this huge project, all by ourselves. And it was really hard at first, because we were trying to, like I say, finish doing all these things. And we didn't have any money to have employees. So we really leaned heavily on our friends and our family. And this is one of the interesting things I think about the early years, is that people didn't have money. Nowadays, people get into the wine business, but they're usually not just, people that don't know anything, that don't have any money. So we planted the major part of our vineyard with the help of our family and friends. We offered them this incredible repast at the end of the day. And a couple that were dear friends of ours were living with us at the time, and Barbara and Bob Pickett. Barbara started the weaving department at University of Oregon, and Bob did a lot of different things. So he did work in the vineyard. They helped us build the house. Barbara and I laid out all the Chardonnay rows together and things like that. But she was also an incredible cook. Her father was a chef, and then she worked at Genoa, which was a really famous Italian restaurant in Portland. I don't know, have you heard of Genoa?
Heard of it.
Yeah, phenomenal restaurant. So when we offered these friends and family a repast, we weren't joking. It was incredible, the kind of food that we put together for our friends and family. And that sort of became a hallmark of us. And throughout the wine years that I was there, especially it was important in the very beginning because there were just a few of us. But once Oregon became known as a possibly really good place to grow grapes, people started coming from all over. I mean, like Aubert de Villaine from Romani Conti slept in our house on subfloors without sheetrock. And he was wonderful. You know, he just was so open to what was going on. And that was the thing that I was amazed about, is how open everything was. Nobody had expectations or pretenses. You just did what you could do, and we shared about our knowledge with everyone else that was in the wine industry. That was really a wonderful thing, the camaraderie. And I'm sure you've heard that from other people too, because it was obvious. And our house and our property around the house that wasn't Vineyard sort of became a place where people came for parties. We'd always have a great big party after the IPNC. And hundreds of people came. And I think one of the, you know, if you want to know my contribution, it wasn't like I had a job description, but what I did do was to provide hospitality for a lot of people, and I enjoyed doing that, and it was important to do, really, really important at that time for us to, you know, to put on a good face for all these people that wanted to know about what was going on here. And it was fun. We had wonderful dinners. I have all the menus from these incredible dinners that we put on for people from, you know, Hubert Trimbach came one time. I remember I made a apricot tart. He loved it. He wrote me a thank you note about my tart. But and we had music. We got people to sing with us. It was just great fun, hard work and great fun. And I learned how to do everything in the beginning because we didn't have any help. So, you know, except the only thing I didn't learn to do was drive the tractor. I did not want to drive the tractor. But I learned we planted grapes, we pruned grapes, we harvested grapes. I learned how to run the press and rack wine and do all that. You know, it was just everything. And I don't know how you could do that nowadays, if you could do it like that. But anyway.
You talked about the kind of the meeting the people like the Letts and Bill Bosser and Dickie Rath, who had already just barely gotten started, but had already gotten started, and changing kind of David and your perspective on what you could do. So tell me about that, the idea of just living in the country and having a few grapes for yourself. What was needed to take the next step to plant that size of wine and actually start making commercial wine? Was it more than you anticipated?
Oh, always more than at least I anticipated, because there was nothing to compare it to. You know, there was nobody else. Well, there were the few other people that were a little ahead of us, and thank God for, you know, for David and Diana, because Dave worked, you know, the first experience Dave Adelsheim had was working in David Lett's winery. And he was, you know, very much of the Burgundian philosophy.
Okay.
So you mentioned that David Adelsheim's first experience was working with David Lett.
Yeah.
And then his next step.
And then he went to the Lycée Viticole in Beaune, I think it was the next year after that, and spent the harvest there, and that was really an important thing. But here's another thing. Dave was traveling a lot. He was constantly, I mean, it was really amazing what he did, because first of all, he spoke German, speaks German, and French, but not as well. But I think Dave has this mentality of wanting to connect and educate and be educated. So he was really into that in a time when it was important, because we had all sorts of things to know about clones and soil and all this stuff. So he was going to like Wadensville to the research station there, and while he was gone, I was always home taking care of the business, and so I was a really important connection between the employees and Dave. And when he was gone, but so what was I going to say about that? Well, just that I think it's important that I was able to stay there always. I'm not sure how we could have done it if I hadn't been that sort of stable force there to talk to the guy driving the tractor, or who knows what, things came up and they had to be dealt with. But as we got bigger and we started to have employees, my role sort of changed because I wasn't having to do so many different things. And once we started to make more wine, I decided to use my one thing that I was educated to do, which was art. And once we had wine, we had to label it. And so I proposed to Dave that I do the wine label, singular.
Singular.
Which I did. And but Dave was always interested in having a different label for every wine. So every varietal. And the first wine I did, the first label I did was, I think this was when we were buying grapes. We hadn't been able to make wine from our own grapes yet. We were still, not enough fruit. So we got wine grapes from Sagemore Vineyard in eastern Washington, Semillon and Merlot. And my first label was just this is a sort of like a wine spirit, just fantasy lady. And I did the whole thing. I drew the letters and everything. And I was trying to harken back to sort of the period of, Art Nouveau, but also those early fruit labels where they have kind of a portrait of the fruit, in the foreground. So I did that label, and that was great. And then the next year, Connie, my friend Connie Keener, came to live with us for a couple of years. And this was the first portrait I actually did, was of Connie, and for the Merlot, because we had both those wines. And then we started making our own wine. And at that point, let's see, what did I do? I think I did the first harvest label, which was a winter portrait of the vineyard and the wind in the sky, because we had a tremendous north wind up there sometimes. It was really dramatic. So I put the wind, that was kind of the portrait of that particular label. And, and then I think all in all, it was probably about 18 labels that I did. So a lot of different drawings. And then we had, we would have these events called rain revels that were in the springtime when it's usually raining in Oregon. And so for our announcements, I would draw these cartoons, and since it was rain revels, I had to come up with something that was sort of consistently about the rain. So the people were always in wetsuits, completely in wetsuits, with flippers and everything out in the vineyard. It's a weird thing, but it was fun. And then, what else did I do as far as the art goes? Well, the labels were the main thing as far as that, until we had our big winery, and then I was doing my sculpture and terracotta stuff for that. But I also did things, the wine industry hired me to do certain art projects. I did a portrait of a Hispanic man, I can't think of his name now. He was a vineyard manager in one of the vineyards, and they used his portrait at this the big salute auction. And then a couple of years I made ceramic tiles, hundreds of them for all the people that came to salute. You know, they gave them to all of the people that were there as guests. And I can't remember what else, but as far as the graphics, that was the main thing I did. And I was also trying to keep up my own artwork. I was an actual artist, and I would have a couple of shows every year in galleries in Portland of my ceramics and sculpture. And I taught some classes through Portland Community College too. Just not big, no big deal, but yeah. So.
You talked about, especially in the early days, having to know a little bit of everything because there wasn't anybody else to do it. So tell me about some of your early memories of planting or pruning or harvesting or pressing, some of the early memories as you were getting the business started. And was it all just learned by doing, or were you being taught by someone?
No, we weren't taught. We made some really interesting mistakes because we weren't taught. Like, hey, let's plant the grapes in June or July, and now we have to water those poor little things, and that was our first planting. I shouldn't even say these things. It's like, this is how they did that? Oh my God. Anyway, yeah, we learned by trial and error sometimes, and then of course things changed once Dave went to Bonn and worked with David. We learned much more, and from other wine people too. But I have some really vivid memories of things I had to do out there in the vineyard. The grueling nature of working in a field for long hours, and it takes tremendous discipline and skill that I didn't have. I might have acquired it if I'd had to do it a long time. But I was really embarrassed once we hired some of the crew, that were Hispanic and had real experience and knowledge of how to work. I was embarrassed to actually go out, and pick grapes with them because they were just whoosh, going down the road, cutting my finger off, There's a lot of grueling work involved with vineyard work. I think the hardest, just the most thankless job of all is brush pulling. Did you do that? After harvest in the middle of winter and everything's dried up, you go out there and you pull those long arms that have been cut off of the trellising. And of course it's all wound up. And so you're ripping it, and a lot of times those things will come around and just whap you in the face, and it's just abusive. And let's see what else. Planting wasn't so bad. Planting was pretty good. And since I didn't ever learn how to drive the tractor, I didn't have to do any of that. But I did have to learn how to work in the winery because I think it was in 1980. Dave had to be gone during harvest. And I ran that harvest all by myself. I had to run the presses and, help with the people that, neighbors and things that came in. It was, our equipment that we came up with, some of it was positively medieval. I think we had some sort of pulley system we had a flat roof. You know how our house is now? There's that kind of a breezeway that goes, you can go in two directions. Well, that was all just a flat roof, and underneath it was the basement, which was our winery at the time, and which was not very big, but anyway. Well, we hooked up this thing. It was a big 2 posts and a beam going across, and it had some sort of a block and tackle thing. I don't remember how it worked. Maybe it was this kind of thing. And we get the boxes, these big, boxes of grapes up on those things, and tip them over into the crusher stemmer and things like that. And then here was another amazing thing. We had our first harvest, which was completely eaten by birds. We had one basket, I think. And at which point we realized we couldn't do it like that anymore if we wanted to actually have fruit. So people were using this chemical called Measure-All, which they would spray on the grapes, and it made the birds sick. And that was supposed to be, a great way to deter the birds. And I just said, no way. We're not spraying anything that's going to make the birds sick. Certainly, that doesn't make sense to me, because we don't know for sure if it's going to harm us too, but I still didn't want to harm the birds. So Dave, I should say, decided to see what we could do through netting, but there was no netting yet. There was no netting in the United States for that purpose. So he found something, I think it was in Switzerland, this netting that he ordered. And it was gold, like gold filament. And it was kind of stretchy, and the holes were about this big, I think. But they were stretchy, like hair netting, straight, it wasn't rigid. And we figured out this way of putting the netting. We had the posts going down the rows, and we had a nail on the top of each one, and we created this thing on the tractor that we could unroll the thing and hook it on, going across like ceiling, all the way down the rows. 19 acres of ceiling of netting. And that was pretty spectacular. We also had a film being made, a feature film called Pay Dirt, going on at the same time we were doing all this stuff. It was right during harvest, and Bob Pickett was trying to build part of the winery. It was just total chaos. And but the really horrible thing was, after all that effort to put that up to save the birds couldn't see the net. So they were flying down into the netting because they could see the grapes and getting stuck in the net. And we got a phone call from the Oregon Fish and Wildlife that we had been turned in for harming the birds, and I was running around, and my sisters and friends, clipping out birds with scissors, trying to get them out of the net. And so that was the last time we did that. But we still didn't give up on netting. We felt that was really the way to go if we could figure out a system that would work. And I think that was when we created our medieval spool system on the back of the tractor, where you get these big bolts of net, and they come off. One person would be on the trailer with the bolt spool thing, and another person would be walking down the row and hooking it onto the nails on each post. And then we also put brown staples in so the birds couldn't get in underneath. And we'd just go down on either side of the row, like curtains on either side. That was how we did it.
It's amazing. You bring up a good point, though, because when you started, not only were there not a lot of people around for you to learn from, but the materials weren't really there. You had to tell me about finding the things you needed, like even just like grapes themselves and stakes and whatever else you needed. Where did you come up with materials to start the vineyard?
I mean, there were some. McMinnville has some stores, or farm stores, and I can't remember. I think if I remember correctly, some of our first stakes were actually bean poles, and we had piles of those things all over the place. These big mountains of these big. They weren't nice, beautiful things. I think I wouldn't be the one to ask the questions about where we found stuff, because I never was the one that was actually looking for it. I just sort of dealt with it once we got it. But there was a lot of just finding things and figuring out what would work best here. It was so much of it was just trying to figure out what would work. everything from grape clones to, you know, like you said, what kind of grape steaks.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of the problems had never been faced before, and that's why there weren't answers, because there wasn't a wine industry. And we had our first winery, as I said, was in our basement. It had been our wood shop, and we just moved the wood shop completely away, and I don't know what happened till where we put the radial arm saw. It was somewhere because we still needed it. That radial arm saw, we pretty much built our house with that tool. That was my dad's saw too. It's 300 years old.
Amazing.
But it was so primitive, and we used to just, when the OSHA or whoever would come and check us out, it's like, oh, I don't know about that. But then we expanded from the basement and we built another winery that was attached to it, a bigger one that was a little more official. And we started actually fermenting. We got some tanks at that point too. We weren't just trying to do it on with who knows what. It's hard to think how to go on.
when you the original 20 acres, you talked about the sort of Chardonnay being one of the things you planted. How do you remember how you decided what was going to be planted and where?
Yeah, actually, when we first started, we knew so little about grapes and wine. I mean, actually, Dave and Paul knew quite a bit about wine, and especially French wine. They'd been actually teaching some wine tasting classes. So they had ideas, but we were really interested in Riesling. I think the first cuttings we put in were Riesling cuttings. And then we got more involved, when we found out about the clones, the Pinot clones, and David Lett and what people were doing. I think we got more focused on that, and eventually the Riesling got pulled out, and we put in Pinot Gris or something, which is now also gone. We're getting down there. But our initial grapes were Riesling. We're very interested in Riesling and Pinot and Chardonnay. And then later on, of course, David Lett introduced Pinot Gris to the United States. And we were really interested in Pinot Gris. And I love Pinot Gris, but it became so popular that I guess, it wasn't economical to really have that be part of the product line anymore. So.
You talked about your role in hospitality in the early days. There wasn't obviously much of a hospitality industry yet in the area.
No, there wasn't any.
Tell me about that. Tell me about how did you sell wine? How did you find customers? How did you make these relationships with people like that?
Well, we did. I was delivering. I was taking wine around. I didn't do Portland. I went south. I went to McMinnville and Corvallis and Salem and Eugene. With my cases of wine, and we had tastings. We had, the Wine Rebels thing, and then we had a Thanksgiving tasting. But we didn't want to have a taste. Well, I was absolutely, completely against having a tasting room because I lived there, and it was already problematic because our business was in the house, and that was hard because I had no privacy really, and to have a tasting room there, because a lot of people thought our house was a tasting room. Sometimes somebody just walk in the door. So it was a little disturbing. And also the other thing that I think was just as important for me is the fear that somebody would get drunk and then get in a car accident leaving our house. I was really concerned about that. So our main thing, of course, was just distributing the wine ourselves and having our tastings, and those were fun. We really pulled out all the stops for those events because it was a big deal for us. And I had to completely clear out my house. I decided after a few of those that I was never going to buy another piece of furniture that I couldn't move by myself. And and it was great because that setting is so perfect. You know, the house was right there, and then the valley, the vineyards in the valley were. It almost didn't matter that our house was always unfinished because nobody noticed it. They were looking out at the vineyard all the time or tasting wine, and so I think if people are having fun, they don't notice a lot of things. Wine always helps.
And on the hospitality side of things, tell me about, you mentioned sort of hosting people in your home and being a place to stay and a place to feed people. That was obviously a big part of the early industry for you and for the other families who were starting.
Yeah.
Tell me about how that sort of came about and how you handled, as the crowd started to grow, how did you sort of handle people coming to visit?
I just did. I mean, I think, fortunately, my personality, I'm actually, I really like people. I'm kind of reclusive. But when people are around me and people come into my home, I enjoy having that opportunity to host them and feed them and play the piano and get people to sing. I love to do that. And people will do that once they feel it's okay. Mm-hmm. And it really brings people together. But I just wanted to mention how Aubert du Villain, the man who owns Romani Conti, stayed with us because there was no place to stay. Really, I mean, we offered, and he wanted to be. He didn't want to go to some old, motel someplace. And I found out that he played the piano. I don't remember how, but I found out, and we had a nice conversation about music. And I said, "Well, do you play?" And he said, "Oh, no, I never play. I wouldn't do that." And I said, I got him to play my piano. I got him to play some Mozart, and he had a great time. And he sent me a beautiful hard-bound book of Mozart's, all Mozart sonatas. And those are the things that make me feel good, because if somebody showed me who they are and enjoyed themselves. And one of the dinners that was pretty spectacular, because it was at early stages of our time out there, so the house was really unfinished. But that never stopped Dave. He wanted to have these gatherings and bring people together that were from other countries, and and they were always great experiences. People always had a good time, but we had to really make it up, as far as, because we didn't have furniture. For this one dinner, I think there were like 25 people. We made a table out of sawhorses and plywood, and I went and found an entire bolt of beautiful, it was like upholstery fabric from medieval times. It sort of looked like that. And I just rolled that down, like 20 feet of plywood, and it looked pretty good. And now Dave was really into cooking. He's a very good cook. And I would consider myself a sous chef, and Dave's the chef. But he decided, I'll never know why, this was the dinner to have sweetbreads. 20 people, sweetbreads. I had never eaten sweetbreads, let alone prepared them. And you know what sweetbreads are? There's some kind of a gland, like a pituitary gland or something, and they're all in a membrane, so you have to take the membrane off of every one of these little things. But we did that, and it was a good dinner, and everybody had a great time. And we learned a lot about, it was great because food and wine are, it's not one or the other. And so a lot of our dinners were very instructive about what worked and what didn't work, food-wise and wine-wise. Mm-hmm. And Yeah, we got good at it. We got good at being host and hostess and preparing food for people. And I think we were into it. It was a fun thing. And then when Lizzie came along, she had a special place because she was this little girl who spoke French when she was 3, because Dave made sure she went to French American school. And so she could hold her own at, these tables full of a bunch of adults from France, and I just kind of sit back and let her talk, because unfortunately I don't speak a foreign language. So I sort of speak a little bit of Italian. That was the language I learned at Portland State. I like Italian.
Speak wine. That's close enough.
Actually, music is my language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of the wines, I'm curious if you remember in your own impressions of the early wines you were making. Did you enjoy the wine as Adelsheim started making wine?
I think we did pretty well, considering how little we knew, and we had problems. There were always problems, different kinds of problems. Sometimes it would be I don't know what caused some of the weird tastes we had, but you don't just toss it out unless it's really flawed. And so I remember a lot of tweaking, the kinds of filtering we did and what we used, various kinds of things, DE and whatnot, and also our equipment made such a difference. In the early days, we had the worst equipment because we couldn't afford anything better. And like that year that I had to run the show while Dave was in France or someplace in 1980, we had a screw press, which is just, the most abusive way to crush or to press fruit. And it takes forever because they have and wind the press, and then you have to turn it back on, and it winds back in, smooshing. So, and we had a really bad crusher stemmer that was similarly, abusive to the fruit, and also we learned about how to handle fruit. I don't think in the beginning we understood that you don't just, smash things. One year, I think it was the year that Veronique's worked for us. Veronique Duran, you probably know Veronique. We actually did tread the fruit. We had those bins that were like 3 feet deep, and we were all in there waiting around and squishing. I didn't like the way that felt though. Have you done that?
Yeah.
I don't know if they do that anymore.
It's a good way to get people to come out and crush grapes for you if you would offer them the chance to step on them themselves.
Yeah.
So, free labor.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting business. There's so many aspects to it. It's just all encompassing because you've got farming, you've got the winemaking, you've got having to figure out how to market and distribute, and the entertainment, the international nature of the wine industry. So it's just so many things to be considered, and it takes kind of a certain kind of a brain to want to do that, I think.
What appealed to you about the industry? What were your favorite parts of being in it?
Well, like I said in the very beginning, I really wanted to live in the country. That was the driving thing for me. And my grandmother, my mother's mother, grew up on a homestead in Indiana, and she was a writer. She was a writer and a composer and an artist. She did everything. But she wrote all these stories about her childhood, which my mother read to us. And I had this totally romanticized picture of living in the country because of that, So it wasn't quite like that. We tried in the very beginning. We got ducks and chickens and geese and and you know, we grew our own food and stuff like that. But yeah, what was the question? How did I get off on chickens?
What were your favorite things about being in the industry? What appealed to you about the industry, about being around wine or being around the vineyard?
Well, I think, like, yeah, as I just said about being in the country, and I also enjoyed cooking and preparing food with, you know, wine and food together. That was really fun for all of us. I think everybody in the wine industry could say that, because you wouldn't be doing it otherwise. And I liked helping out in the way that I could as an artist, you know, and just basically being a helpmate as much as I could. Mm-hmm. But I don't feel like I ever really became mastered any of the aspects of the farming or the winemaking, because I never had that. Well, I didn't have the desire, actually. You know, my profession is as an artist, and I mean, many women in the wine industry did take, I mean, Susan Blosser, for example, you know, she was, and Nancy Ponzi were very much more partners in the actual wine part of the wine business. But mine was a little different. But I do feel like, even though I wasn't, you know, actively doing things that were involved with making the wine or tending the vineyard, I feel like my role was in how to portray the wine industry visually. And I had a great amount of freedom, because there were no wine labels, pretty much, except for David Blatt, you know, who had a beautiful wine label. But nobody had really started doing illustration on labels yet. And so I got to do that. And I got a lot of recognition because it was new and different and, you know, stuff like that. And then a lot now, you know, it's hard to find a label that doesn't have something illustrated. And so that was interesting to be able to do that. And yeah. So the other thing about being out there in the wine business was, well, I'm going to talk about something that's not necessarily a positive, but it's something that I guess is inevitable. And my fantasy, when I was talking to you earlier about, you know, living in the country, was very, very much natural environment. You know, you're in the country and things are growing around you and stuff, but you're not in control. Once we were really in the wine industry, I was very aware of how much control over land you have when you're in there. It's very structured. It's almost, vineyards are almost more rigid than anything. You can't even run across the land like you can in an orchard. You're going up and down, you know, and it's, you know, nothing but grapes. So I started to get really concerned about monoculture, and I think that's one of the issues that's now in the forefront, because it's been so obvious that this is not the right approach. We've got to figure out a way to be more diverse. And I mean, everything from wildfires to just the health of the soil and the bees and everything. So I started to really get sort of depressed by that, because as I saw more and more vineyards going in and more trees coming down, and then when they started putting up 9-foot fencing because they didn't want the deer coming into the vineyard, I started to freak out, actually, because I was fenced in. And that seemed really antithetical to my fantasy. You know, freedom in the country. But I mean, all those things, if you're a farmer, they're all necessary to protect your fruit. But it didn't seem like it had to be that extreme. And I think, you know, I'm out of touch now, but I know there's a lot more concern about all of those things now, and research is being done to figure out how to, I mean, one of my big things was the loss of corridors because of fencing. And I thought, well, why can't we just give them one of the rows so they can get up the mountain, you know? And if they eat the grapes on there, actually the shoots on the way, so be it. But anyway.
Definitely ahead of your time in that thinking, and it is very much more prevalent now in the industry.
Well, it's sort of interesting because I'm 75, and so I grew up during the first big environmental boom. The first Earth Day was 1971, and I think, or 70, I think it was 1970. And in the 60s, Rachel Carson had written Silent Spring, which my mother was super into Rachel Carson and read us her books. And, you know, that book was just a stunning expose of just how out of touch the science was with what was really happening to animals with DDT. And then there was Jacques Cousteau, who was also a major force for the ocean health. So my whole idea about how to live in the country had to do with how to take care of it as well as, you know, live off of it. And when I started to see things becoming so more money based, you know, because that's how it is with business. You know, you're in business to make money. But it just became such a departure from what I had wanted. Yeah.
Did you find that that was something that other people in the kind of nascent industry were concerned about as well? Obviously, a lot of people got into early Oregon wine as the kind of back to land movement, like you talked about. Did others share your concerns?
Well, I didn't really talk about it very much. I think at that point it was, when it was really becoming apparent to me, it was already in the 2000s. And lots and lots of vineyards had gone in, and actually I think Dave and I were split up too by then. So I was really having, you know, these thoughts all by myself. And I was living out there by myself at that time too, because Dave moved out. So, yeah. But I think that's how it is with anything. You know, you have some little thing that you nurture, and it comes to life and it grows, and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you have to think about, oh my God, it's taking over. I have to figure out a way to, you know, sort of keep it in control so it doesn't start to destroy other things. And I think that's my impression of the wine industry now. I think that Lizzie's generation of how old are you?
22.
Okay, you're still really young. But, you know, the people that are children of my the children, you know, my children, like Mimi, she's really, I consider her the kind of people that are going to keep the industry going in the right direction, because they understand all of that.
Absolutely. So you had talked about your labels earlier and your kind of process. Tell me about, as you had to make more and more, tell me about the inspirations. Obviously, we know some of the famous ones, the your portrait of Diana Lett, for example, which is on the wall of our archive. But what were your inspirations, and what were you trying to portray with some of the labels as you started doing more and more portraits?
Well, when I did my first portrait of my friend, my dear oldest friend Connie, I was thinking in terms of what I could do. I mean, first of all, and I knew I could draw a face. I enjoyed drawing people, and so that made sense to me. And I thought, well, there's so many women that are working really, really hard in this industry, but it's always, you know, the men that are getting all the accolades, and they don't really know what we're doing. So I wanted to sort of pay homage to them, to the women. That was really it. And of course Diana, geez, she was the one that really had to be on her own, because there was nothing really happening at that point besides what they were doing. And not only that, but I grew up in this part of the world. I grew up 5 blocks from where I am now, and but she came from Arkansas, so different. And I mean, Diana is, if there ever was a great hostess, it's Diana. I learned from her. I learned a lot from Diana just by watching how she is, with people. She's just got it. I don't know if that's her or the South or both or whatever. But anyway, I'm so thankful for those people, for the Lats and for, the early pioneers, because they were all really wonderful people. Are wonderful people, I should say. And yeah, I'm very lucky that I got to be part of that early time. It was pretty magical, actually. This is the only one that I used a nail on. This was our neighbor boy, Scott Whitehurst, who worked in the winery with us when we were still in the basement. And I thought, well, it's kind of a Huckleberry Finn kind of thing, lying under the grapevine. I thought it was pretty cute. But it didn't sell well. Not nearly as well as women, so I went back to women. But there's Lizzie. This is my goddaughter, Caitlin. This is Connie. I did 2 of Connie because we did a reserve Merlot for a while there, I guess. That's Rihanna Doan. Her father was our vineyard manager, and her mother also worked in the vineyard. She's their daughter, and that's Barbara Pickett. She and Bob lived with us, and she's the one I was telling you about that was the textile artist. And there's Diana and Rita. She and her husband that she divorced when they left, but they were the original couple that we were. This is my sister Susanna and my sister Corinna. So there you have, that's the First Harvest label. This is the building of our house. See, that's our house. Isn't that funny? It's just a big box. And we used to sleep out on the deck and we didn't even have railings. We were crazy. Yeah, this is when we started building the winery, and I had just given birth to Lizzie, so I was in the bedroom. I think I was nursing her or something, and I saw this thing coming over the house, this big thing, and I didn't know what it was. It totally freaked me out. And they were going to pour all this concrete, and they had this huge thing from the truck that went over the house and dumped it down over here somewhere. Yeah, that was
amazing.
We lived in the basement for the first year. We slept on piles of lumber, and we climbed ladders. We had no stairs, and we had 2 stories, so we climbed ladders all for like 5 years. Even our cats learned how to climb ladders. And then here we have the planting experience. I hope you don't mind me doing this.
Please, no, this is fine. This is amazing.
So this is kind of confusing because these are actually separate photographs. But this was the year we planted our first grapes when Paul and Rita were still with us. Here we are with this tank. We're watering away, trying to keep things alive. They didn't do too well in spite of that. And this was our first big planting party. This is my father and Dave's father. And remember I was telling you that we had this big dinner. We offered our friends and family tons of food if they'd come out and help us plant. And see this, we went to the dairy and we were able to get all these milk cartons. And we just opened up the bottoms and put them over to protect the cuttings when we put them in. But isn't that an interesting effect, all those milk cartons?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that's Bill and Terry Doan, whose daughter Rihanna was one of the labels. Mm-hmm. And there I am in my overalls. I think that was the year that I actually ran the harvest. This is at the very beginning, I think the first year we were out there, the second year, we built this Quonset hut for a greenhouse, and we were trying to propagate our own cuttings with leaves, with single leaves. I can remember, I don't know how we did that. I guess there was some way that you could possibly do it, but it was really hard. We had a lot of problems with powdery mildew because it was just, you know, getting that watering thing right. And this is harvesting. This was our harvest. This was what was left after the birds ate all of our grapes that year. That was our dog Jodo. He was a great dog. Here's Dave. This was when we had with our terrible crusher stemmer. That's the year I did, this is me. This is the year that I was doing the harvest and all by myself. Well, not all by myself, I had people. Dave was gone.
Some of the Dave with the video camera in this one? It looks like a camcorder, maybe?
Oh, yeah. That was back in the day when they had those things that weighed about 20 pounds. Yeah, Dave took that all around and took videos. He would always take those to French American School when Lizzie had a performance. All the fathers were in the back doing that with their big face. You're too young to know. This is back in the day when we had a little funky basement winery. Well, actually, that was, what's that? Oh. I wish we had a picture of when we had the Merlot. We had this kind of a trench in front of the house that it was just a big narrow kind of dark thing. It wasn't very wide, maybe like not even as wide as this room. And it went the whole length of that area that's the front of the house, and we had to get more space we needed more space. The basement wasn't enough. So Dave and Bill, our vineyard manager, rented one of those masonry saws that's like a circular saw, and they decided they were going to cut through this like 8-inch thick aggregate concrete wall to this space. And they almost killed themselves. They almost died of asphyxiation from the diesel fumes. And they were lying around on the ground outside trying to gasp. Anyway, we got somebody in there to finish off that job, but we did use that for the Merlot. You're making me remember so many weird things. Oh.
It's my gift.
Yeah. There's Veronique.
Oh my God, is that Veronique?
Look at her. She's so cute. She was just a young'un. Can you see her, Tia? Yeah, that was the year we stomped them. They don't have a picture. There's no picture of that. These are our neighbor boy. This is one of our neighbor boys who was helping us bottle wine. And, oh yeah, I had to do that too. I forgot. We bottled and labeled all our wine at home too. And I remember doing that with Lizzie on my back. I had her in a back carrier thing, and I was just. And then we were now we're doing, this is after we actually had enough wine to, well, no, didn't have that much, but this was one of our tastings. And this was when Connie was living with us, so these are her paintings. Mm-hmm. She did wonderful things. There's Lizzie helping out with one of the wine tastings. Can you see her?
Incredible.
This is after one of the IPNCs, and we had one of those big parties. And we'd have a huge table outside, another one of those plywood things, with lots of food.
Amazing.
And this is Lizzie going down the vineyard. That was a very sad day because that was the day our kitty cat died, Bunny.
Mm-hmm.
And we went and dug up a part of the area around the big black walnut tree on the side of the road there. And as we were burying her, Lizzie took off down the vineyard, ran all the way down, and we ran after her. She was down at the bottom of the vineyard, and it was wet because it was like January. And she found this little stream there, and she was completely engrossed because there was a worm in the stream that was trying to get out of the water. And she didn't want to leave. She was having such a good time. And then I did all of this. I did all of our so-called landscaping. Lots and lots of brickwork, which was really fun. I love bricks. This was Gerard, what's his name? British wine writer. Oh, can't think of his name. Here's when we got the governor's award at the state fair. I was pregnant with Lizzie. Yeah, that's a Tia.
Oh my gosh, it is.
Yeah, and there's Lizzie on the tractor. I think she drove it once. And here's Dave mowing the lawn. I think that's the only time he did that, but I got my camera out and took a picture to document it.
That is amazing.
Oh, he'd kill me if he heard me say things like that.
You brought up an interesting point earlier when you were talking about your labels and the kind of the women behind your labels and the women behind the industry, and it's something we've heard a lot about, especially and as you talked about today. You did a lot. You pulled a lot of weight, outside of the limelight of the industry. Tell me about yourself and the other women at the time, the Diana Letts and those and sort of how you. What your attitude was as you were doing all this work and the industry was just starting to get recognized, but it was the men who were getting recognized. How did you?
Well,
that?
I make it sound worse than it really was. I think I never felt, certainly among my colleagues in the wine industry, any kind of differentiation between what the men were doing and what the women were doing. It seems to be a chronic problem that, when people are writing about something, they tend to focus a lot. It's changing though, focus on what the man does and don't realize just because it's not in her name or whatever that she hasn't really been participating or that it's not significant.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a lot of respect for women in the wine industry, and maybe sooner than in a lot of other places, because I'm just thinking, there are quite a few. And when did Lynn Penner-Ash?
No, gosh.
That was in the 80s.
Late 80s, yeah.
Yeah. So, and there are lots of women that are in positions of winemaker and vineyard manager. I mean, all of it. So it's really incredible. It's great. And I always felt like I was respected for what I was doing, that people appreciated my contribution, whatever I was doing artistically. And yeah, well, I think that there's a lot of artistry involved in winemaking. So it was a good fit for me, because like Dick Ponzi, for example, one of his dearest friends, Ray Grimm, was my mentor. He was the teacher that taught me everything I know about ceramics. He was the head of the ceramics department at Portland State. And he and Dick designed the weather machine at Pioneer Courthouse Square. And that's a pretty fun thing. And yeah, so it seemed like it was sort of an arty thing to be in the wine industry. And I was able to keep on doing my own thing too. And eventually, after I realized that we were never going to make enough money to finish the house, because that was before we got partners, I decided to start my own business.
and see if I could actually make enough money through that to at least get Lizzie's bedroom done before she moved out. So I started Fondo Terracotta, and that was in '92, I think. And I took over our old winery at the house, not the basement, but the actual winery, and I made that into my so-called factory, I guess. And then I was able, and then Corinna, my sister, became my partner, and she had her own businesses, so she understood about having sales reps so we could sell out of state and things like that, and that was good. I got Lizzie's bedroom done.
So what exactly was the business?
It was it was called Fondo Terracotta. Fondo is the base word for fundament or foundation in Italian. It means the earth, the very bottom. And we were totally focused on doing red terracotta exterior architectural ornament and garden stuff. So that was it. This has some pictures of some of the stuff that we did. Just to give you an idea.
Oh my gosh.
This is a big lion head fountain, and this Larry Ferrara has that. He was the architect for our winery.
Oh my gosh.
This is the elephant fountain. That was in a very ritzy place. Pedestals, bird baths, lots of bird baths. Yeah, anyway, stuff like that.
Were they things that you were creating on your own, or were the things you were being asked to create? Were you your own designs, or
Yeah, our own designs. We did we sculpted the masters and then made plaster molds of everything so that we could mass produce is kind of a euphemism. Because we were just press molding by hand everything into the clay. It wasn't like slip casting where you're just pouring it in and dumping it out. It's very physical work. And because like when we did the sconces, the light sconces for the winery, that took over a ton of clay. Every sconce was 25 pounds starting, and so you're pounding this stuff, and that's how you have to do it. You really have to physically pound into the molds to get that all the way into every little interstice, and then wait till it's dry enough that you can pull it out without it break or be misshapen somehow. And it's tricky because it has to be at the right dryness, not too dry, but not too wet either. And that was I think that was probably the hardest project was doing the sconces, because it was a curved wall and clay shrinks. And so you had to do these weird calculations to make sure that the curvature and the shrinkage would, match up with the, and Bob, my friend Bob Pickett, he became a partner in our business, so there were three of us, Corinne and myself and Bob. And he was the one that figured out all these kinds of things, calculating the curvature, so when we made the mold it would, so that was a big job doing those sconces. There were 82, I think. So that had to be times 25. It's a lot of clay. Those molds are still down in the basement in the old winery, and I don't know what to do with them. There's so many and they're so heavy. I've got tons of molds in my basement that I carted away, not of the sconces, but of other things. I didn't take the things that I made for the winery. I figured, well, if anything breaks, at least, there's the mold there. They can have somebody or me make another one if they have to. But I really enjoyed doing that, having that experience of working with Larry Ferrara and doing the winery.
Tell me about you talked about you kept your art up the entire time and you were doing shows, and tell me about some of the art over the years, some of the art you've created, some of the things you're proud of, and are you still creating art today?
Yeah, Yeah, I am. I took a long hiatus for 10 years. I had a lot of transitioning to do after I moved away from there, and it was a hard time for me because I had to kind of refigure out, how I was going to move forward, and I didn't really want to do that. I sort of rejected it for a while, and I went back to school in what year was this? 2006. I went to PCC to I wanted to get a degree in psychology, and I was thinking I wanted to do art therapy. Get out of being in the production of art and actually, help people buy my art or something. Buying it, not buying it, but help them through art. And I really enjoyed these psychology classes. It was fascinating. And one of the classes that I had to take was abnormal psych. And for that class, you had to have 60 hours in a practicum at some organization that was dealing with mentally ill people. And I was really concerned about veterans and war and all that. So I managed to get myself into a place in the VA hospital where they had an outpatient clinic for veterans. and they didn't really have an art therapy program. So the first couple of years I would just go and hang out with veterans during they have sort of like a place where they can just come and get a lunch, have a hot lunch and play chess and checkers and whatnot. And I sort of got myself in there, and then I started starting doing art projects with them, and that evolved into an actual sort of a special art therapy group, which I did until last March when they stopped everything. So it was 12 years of being there. And that was a really good experience for me. I never got to the point where I decided to become an actual psychologist, because that would have required more time in school, and I didn't really need to have that. I was already doing what I wanted. And I wasn't I wasn't getting into it for the money. I was getting into it because it's what I wanted to do. And then the other thing that happened was my goddaughter, Caitlin, who's on the Chardonnay Reserve label, very tragically had a son who was severely handicapped. He was deprived of oxygen at birth from a particular thing that happened right at the time she was giving birth. And so he's completely helpless. He's 14 now, but he couldn't do anything. He can't even eat and can't walk or talk, but he can hear. He has great hearing. And so that was my connection with Che, was music. And I started taking care of him a couple days a week a year after he was born. And I did that too up until the pandemic. So those were really important parts of my life, that allowed me to do what I love, art and music, with people that I cared about. And so I've been kind of floundering around here trying to, like a lot of people, I think. But yeah, I don't think that really was what you wanted to know.
That was an incredible, much better answer than I would have had you. How have you remained involved with the winery over the years?
Well, I haven't really been very involved, because once Dave and I got divorced and I moved away, there really wasn't any way for me to participate. I had a fantasy, but that was really unrealistic, that Dave and I could still somehow, be partners and we'd do all that. But that wasn't going to happen. Dave, and Eugenia, this is a woman who really understands the wine industry and is a great partner for Dave. And I'm really happy for him. But it made me have to really reconsider how I was going to move forward with my own life. And I actually just recently was asked by what's her name in our winery? Is it Stephanie? She wanted me to do something, design a label or something for the 50th anniversary. And I decided I didn't want to do that because she already had a whole lot of ideas of what she wanted it to be. And I felt like I didn't want to get into a situation where I was being controlled. You know, if I couldn't express my own whatever it was about this 50th anniversary, I just didn't want to do it. I didn't say that to her, but that was what I came out, that was the thought I realized I had. And so when I had that interview at the winery, at the house with Dave for our 50th, she talked to me then, and I also showed her some other things that I had done because she was curious, you know. And one of the things I showed her was I had designed this T-shirt for Steamboat in 1991. Have you seen that? Yeah. It was a big splashy wave, sort of a hokusai concept, you know, with this wine barrel in it. And you know the name, and it's in the fish were jumping out of the water, and then the S was two trout, but they were in the shape of an S, and she loved it, and she really pushed for me to give her that design to make into a T-shirt that would commemorate the thing. I said, that's great, you know, that's easy. You didn't do that, so. But
With the 50th anniversary, what do you kind of hope the legacy of Adelsheim is as you look back on those years?
Well, I hope that they will remember all the things that were done in the very beginning. You know, to make. I don't take any credit for this, but Dave certainly does. I think the fact that he and Ponzi and Lett and Blosser were, you know, the founders, meant that there was real integrity in the way the industry was born. I mean, one of the first things that Dave was really concerned about was the labeling laws, or lack thereof. And the fact that California was labeling things, Burgundy, Bordeaux, Champagne, you know, it didn't tell you anything about what was going on in the wine, what kind of grapes or anything. So that was really an important thing. And of course that's not going to, well, maybe it will change because things don't always stay the same, but that was really important, and that should be remembered because it did change labeling, not just in Oregon, but I think it forced this country to have to reckon with that, you know, truth in labeling thing. The other important thing was the research that Dave did on where grapes could be planted in the Willamette Valley. You know, he did all those incredible maps. I remember him night after night. Dave's got this table with all these topographical maps and all of his highlighter pens. You know, he's going every little line. He's you know, what the elevation is. You know, this is perfect. You know, this has got to be can't be developed on that property. That's going to be land for growing things. And then they did. I think that was the reason they have those zoning laws. And then all the clonal research they did, that was absolutely essential to what was put in the ground. What else? Well, I think that we're trying to do the right thing by our employees. We've got the you know, the medical
Salute.
truck, yeah, things like that. I don't know so much about what's happened since I left, though, and I have to admit I haven't been keeping up.
Why was it so important why were those things so important to the founders? Why the labeling laws and the land use legislation? The industry wasn't really even an industry yet. There were only a few people making commercial wine, but yet they were so concerned about protecting the future. Do you remember why, when those conversations came up, why it was so important to protect this future of this industry that didn't even have a sure future yet?
Well, I don't know exactly. I think it just, it's an attitude, an attitude of honesty. And I think once Dave and, the others were aware of how wrong it was to be labeling wines in ways that didn't tell the consumer anything, they didn't want to do that. And of course they wanted to plant clones that were going to actually grow here and produce good wine. So, there's a certain amount of self-interest involved with those decisions, but they're also good for posterity because that's the right way to go. So, and I think people, pioneers so-called, tend to be idealistic people. You have to have a positive, hopeful attitude in order to take a leap and do things that you're not going to be sure how it's going to turn out. But you have enough idea that you have faith that it will turn out.
Absolutely. You talked about the pandemic that we're all struggling with right now. As we are hoping to be coming out of it soon, what are you sort of looking forward to getting back to? What is next for you?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, getting outside again. I'm looking forward to spring and summer. I'm a big I garden. That is as important to me as music and doing things in clay. And so starting next month, I will be setting up my back bedroom into a little mini greenhouse. I have 12 grow lights and I grow hundreds of starts. And most of those I donate to this organization that Lizzie found out about called Growing Gardens. And they provide food for people that are homeless or people that are really, struggling. Food. And they have community gardens and stuff, so that's really fun. And then I, starts for my friends, and I do my own starts for the garden, and I'm gonna get involved. I went to a big meeting, a Zoom meeting, a week ago in Lake Oswego for this. It's called the Lake Oswego Sustainability Network, and I was really impressed with what's going on in Lake Oswego. They're really taking seriously, how to take care of the environment. And one of the things I'm interested in getting involved with is the growing food programs that are in the schools now, or starting to be in the schools. See how I can help with that. I'd love to get back at the VA or in taking care of my grandson, but I don't know. I have no idea. Some people are saying this is going to go on for another couple of years. I might be dead.
Yeah. Sooner rather than later, we need that. What about with your art? What are you working on with your art right now?
Well, right before Christmas, I made a bunch of pots, and I set a goal. I said I got to make enough pots before Christmas to fill my big kiln, which I managed to do. And I can show you some pictures. Oh, this is my broken screen. Oh well. I have two iPads, but the one that I like is still my old one. Isn't that sad? With a broken screen. Let's see here. For a while I was doing very serious sculptures, and then I just decided it was too heavy. I needed to do things that were just fun, and that's what I did this last, oops, I went too far. this last time. You know, I'm just going to do things that are simple, hand-built, useful. That's it. I did all those portraits over there on the wall.
Those are beautiful.
Those are portraits I did for Bravo Youth Orchestras. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It's a program that's in the Portland Public Schools, in the very poorest. It started in Rosa Parks, which is the poorest school in Portland, mainly, you know, Black Hispanic population. And God, how did I get so far? And I heard about that when they first started in 2000, I think it was 14. I met the director, Seth Truby, and really hit it off with him. I was really interested in what this program was all about. It started in Venezuela, called El Sistema. And have you heard of it? Well, it was started 50 years ago, and this man wanted to, this Venezuelan man wanted to get music education actually as a part of the school curriculum, and he was really concerned about the poorest children not having any way to learn how to play instruments, because you have to have money to buy an instrument, and then you have to have money to pay a teacher. So he managed to get this program started in Venezuela called El Sistema, where he actually had learning how to play violins, cellos, violas, all of that in public schools starting at grade 2. And this was such a huge success. It spread all over the world. And it finally came to Oregon in 2014. And it started, and now it's in 7 schools. It's just a phenomenal program because it's transforming these kids. They don't necessarily turn into, you know, professional musicians, but it changes them. It changes them in so many ways. And when you look at the study that they've done, every year they give you, you know, a printout showing you how do these kids compare to the kids that aren't in Bravo in terms of attendance, their grades, their discipline problems. It's off the charts. I mean, it's so exciting. So I said to Seth, I said, I would love to draw some kids. I just love to draw some portraits of the kids playing their instruments. I want them to be interacting with their instruments. I don't want them to just stand there holding it and looking at me. And he said, sure, go for it. So I drew these drawings, and he liked them so much. He had them made into cards, so they use those now for their, you know, thank you notes or whatnot. And it's just really nice. I've done that for a couple of years, and it's kind of a way to keep drawing, because I don't draw like some people where you just, when I want to do something just spontaneously to be creative, I head for the piano. That's my go-to thing. And it's a different thing. Drawing is much more intense, and it's more demanding of me in a way. I don't have a kind of, well, portraiture is demanding. I think if I were doing something that was more free or abstract or something, but you know, when you draw somebody, you have to think about how they look, and you have to really work at it, because it doesn't take much for you to make it not look like.
Here's some of the planters in the top part. But you know, they're really crude. I like the crudeness of clay. It's so freeing, you know, it's just plastic, and I like texture, so it's fun. I did a couple of sculptures that, if you want to go down in the basement and see my studio quickly, if you have time. I did a sculpture of, at the time Cheney was vice president, and I was so angry with Cheney. I did this sculpture that was sort of about arrogant greed. In fact, the title was Cracks in the Armor of Arrogant Greed, because this sculpture that I did literally cracked without my doing anything. And at first I was upset, and then I thought, oh, that's perfect. It's just really, But what was so amazing is that Trump came and he was that sculpture. He truly epitomized that sculpture. But then I dropped it and I chipped it, and it didn't totally break though, it just chipped out in certain places, and at first that bothered me, and then I thought, that's okay too. It's just another aspect of destroying this maniac. And then I did it, I started getting really upset about the refugee problem, and I still am, of course, but I wanted to try and do something to depict that, and I did one sculpture of a woman who I had seen a photograph of, and I didn't have the photograph, but I remembered it, and I really liked this sculpture, and I had it on my mantle, and my mirror fell off the wall and knocked it off, and just totally broke it to smithereens, that did upset me, because that piece I did like, but I don't know. It just is the way, things come and go, and it's all just stuff. I'm learning how to let go. You gotta do that someday.
Difficult, but healthy.
Yeah, it is. It's always difficult to let go, because if you love something. I have too many pictures. I think that's the real problem. I don't know how to edit. I mean, I do, but I don't know how to be disciplined enough to do it, when I should, which is right at the very time you take something. Okay, here's one of my cartoons. I couldn't find the sculpture.
Oh.
Isn't that terrible? It's so disrespectful. He doesn't really deserve any respect, though. I have to find my other one, and then I won't bother you anymore with my stupid stuff I do.
It's amazing to see all the different kinds of art. All the different kinds of mediums and all the different kinds of styles. It's an impressive array.
I don't know. I just, it's funny. This depends on what's happening. Certain things, certain media are more appropriate than others for certain things. And I don't do any of it very well, but,
I would argue with that. At least the clay for sure is amazing.
Oh, this isn't any, this is, I have to just show you this because I thought it was so hilarious. 2 years ago, when I was down at the beach with Diana Lett, they have a beach cabin down there at Sitka. We went into the Rite Aid in Lincoln City. It was right before Halloween, and I found this life-size skeleton, and I've always wanted a life-size skeleton, not a real one, of course, but it was all folded up and hanging, in the section of Halloween stuff. And I thought, what's going on there? And then I realized, it was the whole thing. And it was $60. And I thought, oh gosh, that's a lot. And then I thought, no, it isn't, not for a skeleton. So I took it up to the checker, and she was like, okay. And she said, oh, it's half price. So I got it for $30. And this is what I did for Halloween. What was really great is when I put that out there, I was out there in the yard, and this little girl came by on her bike, and she said, I'm glad he's wearing a mask. I thought, yeah, there you go. Oh, man. Here's my other one. Here's equal justice under law. Trump with wrecking ball.
That's a very good depiction. I'm impressed.
I sent that to Nicholas Kristof. You know who he is? Mm-hmm. He grew up in
Yamhill's favorite.
Yeah.
Son, yes.
Well, he'd just written a column that day on the importance of political cartoons and how much more effective they are than I'm saying this as a,
Writer.
yeah, as an opinion writer for the New York Times, and it was a great column. And I thought, well, I'm going to write him a thank you note and send him my cartoon. So I did. He didn't write me back. I didn't really expect him to, but anyway.
He's growing grapes now. He and his family have a vineyard
Really?
up in Gaston, basically, sort of near Elk Cove.
I'll be
They
darned.
started Christoph Family Farms. They're growing other things as well, but they planted grapes a couple of years ago.
Do you know what kind?
I don't. I haven't been there yet, but hoping too soon. But he and his wife and they have 3 kids who are all involved in the project in one way or another, either
Oh,
doing the farm work or the marketing work or whatever. So another small little vineyard project up in the hills.
that's something people really like to get into. Well, maybe you'll interview him.
That's the plan.
Yeah.
Hopefully this year.
Are you guys done?
Well, let me wrap it up really
Oh,
quickly.
okay.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
for
you're
all of your
so
time
welcome.
and your stories and all of the amazing visual aids today. It's a special treat for us. We're going to go ahead and let you off the hook.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.